Good evening and welcome. I have 5:30, and so I would like to call the meeting to order and ask that the clerk take roll call, please.
Branch,
Here.
Bray,
Here.
Carroll,
Here.
Graham,
Here.
Henry,
Here.
Hussey,
Here.
Mihalovich, Prather, Schulte,
Here.
Scribner.
Here.
Thank you. Tonight is a continuation of our budget discussions. Before we get started, Mrs. Carroll has an introduction that she would like to make.
Thank you. I have a visitor here this evening. My best friend and roommate from college at Missouri State University, Jennifer Dorsey, is visiting me from Fort Myers, Florida. First time back to Jeff City in 7 years. And so this evening she's going to spend part of the night with me at City Hall to see our budget procedure. So she is a good friend or what, let me tell you, to come here. And anytime in the future, if you go to jeffcitymo.org, you can stream and watch this when you're back in Florida. So thank you for being here with us tonight.
Thank you and welcome. As we have discussed in the past, a budget document is a living document and subject to changes. Over the past couple of weeks since we met the last time, there has been some major developments that have impacted, that will have an impact on our budget. So having said that, the mayor, Mr. Nicholas, Mr. Betts, and myself met after the last council meeting to discuss the impacts of the R.R. Donnelly situation. And so there are some adjustments that need to be discussed with regard to revenue. So before we dive back into where we were at with the expense side of it, we need to jump back to the revenue side and have some discussions with regard to that. So I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Betts to talk about and introduce those changes. Also, before he starts, real quickly, he did send out a link to the online worksheets that you can access those on your iPads. Mr. Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Basically, if you look on the screen, you can see there are three highlighted areas there that we need to discuss tonight. And these, again, have to do with R.R. Donnelly. And then there's one change that we as a staff, since we've created the budget, discovered that we thought, since we were adjusting the numbers, that we should go ahead and maybe adjust this number as well. So the first one there, though, is the sales tax. And initially, we had thought, the city administrator and the mayor and then the council, after the last meeting, had thought 9.7 was a good number. With the events that unfolded, we know for sure that R.R. Donnelly pays us about $10,000 a year in sales tax themselves as a company, just from different business that they might do in and around our area or maybe within the state, to where they have to charge some sales tax. And we were able to look that up. What we did was we kind of tried to put a number, and it's very difficult on, you know, what the loss of jobs and the mentality might be of the citizens in Jefferson City from losing, 475 to 500 jobs. So we didn't have really any scientific way of doing it, but we did kind of say if they're 1% of the jobs, then maybe it's about 1% of what our sales tax would be. Then we kind of thought, well, some of those folks will get new jobs and different things like that, and some of them will still need to do grocery shopping and some of those things. So we kind of brought it down to about 0.5%. So basically what we said was it would have about a $50,000 effect on our sales tax, is kind of what we're estimating. Again, it's nothing scientific about it. It's more of a guess, and that's kind of what we hope that it has no effect, but if we thought it was imprudent to probably put some number to it. So all total it'd be $60,000, $10,000 for R.R. Donnelly, and then $50,000 for the loss of jobs. So it'd bring us from 9.7 down to 9.64 is what the recommendation would be to change that number to. That's all I have on that particular item.
Okay, sales tax adjustment, any discussion with regard to that? Questions for staff? Sorry. Any questions or discussion of council on the reduction of sales tax by $60,000? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Betts, we'll move on to franchise and utility tax, please.
Okay, with franchise and utility tax, there are two things that came into effect here with the $130,000. We know that 80,000 of it comes from R.R. Donnelly. R.R. Donnelly paid us approximately $78,000 a year in utility taxes. We went ahead and rounded that to $80,000. As along with that is we got to looking at the cell phone, telephone utility tax, and this is one of the numbers, if you remember, from FY13 2.0 that we've scaled down, and we had scaled down even for FY14. We were looking at where our receipts were at the end of July, and we're still not sure that the 2.5 number that we have in the FY14 budget is quite right. So we thought it best to maybe scale it back still just a little bit more and bring it down to 2.45 million. So that would be the other $50,000 of that number. Right now we're on pace this year to be in the around the 2.4 number for the year. So we thought reaching 2.5 might be a stretch. It might make it there next year, no question. We just thought that since we were making some adjustments here, it might be a good time to look at this particular line item as well. So 80,000 of it will be for R.R. Donnelly, and 50,000 of it is just from tracking the receipts up to date this year. So
Thank you. Any questions or concerns with regard to the franchise and utility tax adjustment of $130,000? None? Okay. Then fees, licenses, and permits. Mr. Betts?
yes, on this particular line item, we actually have an increase here. And what we're increasing here is $80,000. And that's because we are anticipating a building permit will be issued in the FY 2014 budget. And we kind of have a pretty good idea of what the cost of the project will be. And based on that, we calculated what that building permit would be. And that building permit would be about an $80,000 building permit. So we could increase the budget here by $80,000. We just found out about that, I think last week is when staff was informed, maybe even earlier this week when staff had some meetings and found out about it. So we thought it would be good to put that in there. The one thing I would like to point out to Council, and Mr. Schulte asked me to make sure I pointed out as well, is that obviously this would be a one-time thing for FY14, and we'd probably have to roll back these particular items in FY15. So that $80,000 would have to roll back because we're not going to get could get other building permits, but that particular one will not be there in FY 2015. So,
Mr. Scrivener?
The flip side of that is, was there any building permits, such as maybe St. Mary's, I don't know when they got their permit, that should have been rolled off of your calculations for 2014?
yeah, we took care of that in the 2013 budget. So you would be correct. That is the flip side, and we did already have that taken into account.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, concerns with regard to the building permit? Okay. So with those adjustments, the general fund revenue projections decreased by $110,000. So at the end of our last discussions, we were at $28,824,915, and with those adjustments, general fund budgeted revenue would be $28,714,915. The mayor has some proposed offsets for that $110,000, and I will ask him to introduce those at this time, and then we will go back into our discussions of or Mr. Betts will introduce those, and then we'll go back into our discussions where we left off, and then pick those as we get to the end. At the end of the worksheet, as you can see in your iPad there, changes not in the budget book. So, Mr. Betts.
Yeah, for the expenses, we worked with the mayor and we came up with some things. The first line item that I want to point out there is the addition of the UHC wellness line item. This was something we discovered here recently, is that in the past, instead of having a line item in the budget for the UHC wellness and making that payment, it's kind of been taken out of the department's insurance budget. So when we did the budget for FY14, we were not aware of such a line item. So, and we were budgeting everybody down to, as close as we could get them for the cost of the employee. We discovered this, and we thought now was the time to put that into the budget so that the council knew we were going to create a line item. It'll be in the 10185 area that is called UHC Wellness. It does cost about $25,000 a year for the city to offer the wellness program. My understanding from Mr. Nicholas and Ms. Strope is that it does save the city money in the long run for our insurance program to have such a wellness program. The second line item that you see there, it goes to help offset some of the changes that we made to revenue, as well as that wellness line item. Is there was a funding in the budget for a patch truck, and it was $60,000, and that's in the public works area. The recommendation there is to remove the patch truck from the budget. There was funding that the council wouldn't have known about, but there's funding on November 1st to go ahead and offer. There's a street worker position that's vacant currently today. And Mr. Nicholas, in his initial budget, and the mayor had agreed, was that on November 1st that position could be filled. So it was in the budget as being filled on November 1st. It's now recommending not to fill it and add it to the vacancy savings plan. There was also a fire vehicle for an assistant chief fire vehicle, not a fire truck, but an assistant chief fire vehicle, in the amount of $45,000 that was in the budget in the fire department. It's recommended now that we don't fund that. There is a new recommendation of funding a half a year or somewhere in that neighborhood, whatever the $70,000 would offer for a fire chief. So it'd be roughly about half a year worth of a fire chief in that instance. And then the other recommendation was to reduce the contingency fund from $122,000 down to $72,000, so reduce it by $50,000. So all total, with the additions and the changes, it brought the budget back to the $110,000 in expenses that we would need to change. So these are the mayor's recommendations from my conversations with him.
Bill, I just want to thank you and Sean and Nathan for meeting late the other night and going over this. And I think obviously the unfortunate developments with R.R. Donnelly in the last week and a half made us as a community kind of look at things a little bit differently. The things that you see up there that I've decided to unfund or defund, I guess in this case, they're items that were kind of sort of on the bubble before as I was working on the budget, as many as you guys know, since February or March. Through that process, from time to time, Bill would come to me and say, hey, we found blank in transit, or blank in here, or blank in there as far as additional funds. So as you found the additional money, some of that stuff kind of did make it into the budget, and unfortunately some of the news are Donnelly. That's why it was taken out. So I appreciate you.
Thank you, Mayor. And we will, as we move down through, we'll get to each of those line items and specifically discuss each one and open it up for council debate and questions. When we left off at our last meeting on Monday, we had finished up discussions of JCTV, and the next item on the list is a camera person for $5,000. So, Mayor, do you have any comments that you'd like to make with regard to that?
I think from what I've been told from Bill, I think that would allow us to still have this on Ustream or YouTube, these meetings or council meetings or regular meetings. I'm not sure at that dollar amount if it would include committees or not. I know there's been some talk about trying to get more committee meetings or committee meetings period on Ustream, but I think we want to continue to offer these meetings to the public via the internet.
Thank you. Council debate or discussion, questions on camera person for $5,000? No, Mrs. Carroll?
Thank you. The 5,000, I have two things. One would be if we would be able to talk with JCTV about them possibly taking on that role. What could they do for the $5,000? But my other concern that I'd like to really make clear, and perhaps when it becomes time for the public hearing, which will be in another week or so, is to make it clear to the public so they understand that this also may affect things such as, you know, Capitol Caroling and some of the other events that JCTV does that maybe aren't really city related, but I don't want any surprises or the public to call us on Christmas and say, what did the council do? We don't have Capitol Caroling, and my family's enjoyed watching it for so many years, like those kind of things. So I just wonder, and I don't know if Gloria or if city staff could get us information of what exactly it means when we say JCTV is going away. Of course, on the channel that would be gone televised, and it would be now streaming online. But the other events, the ice arena, the ice show, the other, I don't know if there's other events, but what other events now would disappear? And just so the public knows, because there may be interest to revive that and there may not. So either way, we just want to make sure it's out there to the public.
Staff have any response to?
Well, I do think that Ms. Enlow would probably be more appropriate to answer, but my understanding is that all of their salaries are paid by the subsidy that the city gives. And so, although apparently they've gotten some money from Lincoln to make it through the end of this year, so I think that JCTV would cease to exist, and that would mean that all those things that they cover would also no longer be covered. The $5,000 cameraman is just to cover city council meetings. It would not cover anything else.
Mr. Hilbert?
I'd say two things. I think probably the answer is it depends on what Lincoln does. If they decide to fund JCTV, they'll still probably do the same type of things, and if they don't, then it'll go away. Although, as I sent out an email, so I don't want to sound like I'm disagreeing with Nathan, but the $5,000 should cover about 200 hours of TV time, of video time, if we're estimating about $25 an hour. So we probably can get more than just the council meetings, but all the meetings would have to be here, because this is our only capacity, unlike JCTV that has the ability to hand film things.
Mayor?
To Carrie's point, if we're going to get some information from JCTV, I would like to know the cost of the other events that Carrie mentioned. I would think those would be possible items within the community that we could probably help raise money to show those on that channel, depending on the cost.
Mr. Scrivener?
The $25 an hour person, are you thinking that would be an existing employee, or would that be a contract person? And if it's an existing employee, does that include benefits and Social Security, FICA, things like that?
Yeah, when we figured it up, it does. We did put, I believe it was about approximately $4,600 into the IT line item for part-time employee, and then about $400 to cover taxes and those types of things. Our goal would be to try to find someone who wanted to do this once every couple weeks in the evening, and look for someone to do a part-time position. That is our ultimate goal, is to find somebody who's looking for 3 or 4 hours worth of work every couple weeks, or is interested in doing that. If we cannot, then we would probably look at trying to get some members of city staff and pay them in order to come work those evenings and those types of things. But obviously the one thing we really want to make sure of is that we got someone who was accountable and would show up and be here and those types of things. So
It would seem to me that if you were using existing staff with overtime laws and so forth, that you might have a hard time funding it for $25 an hour.
And that's a good point. Most likely if we use existing staff, they'll be IT staff, and none of them are paid overtime. So that's the unfortunate thing about being an IT worker. So.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So Mrs. Carroll's request for a list, can staff work on that and send an email out what special events that are covered that would be impacted? Would be great. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Henry, did you have anything? No? Other discussion on the camera person? Mr. Mihalovich.
Well, if JCTV is going to bring us a list of programs and such, maybe it might be good for them to bring us what a contracted service that we're envisioning would cost if we just paid it to them as opposed to additional staff. So I'd be interested in what they may charge per hour.
Mr. Henry?
We have that information coming. Gloria was going to put that in, Gloria Enlow was going to put that information together for us, so we've got that coming already.
Thank you. Other discussion with regard to camera person?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
So if I understand Larry correctly, if I'll just use round numbers, if it's $25 an hour and capital caroling is 4 hours, it's $100. Okay, right? Is that what I'm trying? We will get a dollar amount from JCTV on what it costs to put the parade, Capitol caroling, all those kind of things on the air.
Hey, Glory, can you make sure you turn? I don't think I turned that mic on. It's a button in the back if you just want to hold it. Nathan, can get it. Let's hope the batteries aren't dead. I didn't think about public speaking.
What we're actually working on is we do have an hourly rate that we charge some groups to do outside production services, and that's what we're doing. It's not just the taping of the event. Obviously, when you have a 3-camera shoot like Capitol Caroling and it's a 2-hour concert, it's hours and hours of editing work too. So that's all going to be figured in to what the figures that we're providing. But we'll clearly outline what's the shoot, the cost of the shoot, the cost of the editing, and cost of loading it into the system and playing all of it.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay. Next item on the list is funding for a finance director of $130,000. Mayor.
I think this is something that you all have obviously heard in the past. This was something that I wanted to bring back into the 2014 budget. Appreciate the job that Bill and Sheila have done getting us to this point. I feel per our charter, may not state in the charter, but I think the spirit of the charter calls for a finance director, and I think as a city this size, it's time that we fill that position.
Thank you, Mayor. Council questions, discussion, debate? Mr. Graham.
Just have a question of, I guess, when would this search begin for the finance director?
Well, if you're funding the position fully, then we would begin the search as soon as the budget is completed, so that we could have somebody on board as soon in the fiscal year as we possibly could.
So is the yearly salary 130?
That's salary and benefits.
Oh, salary and benefits. Okay.
I do. So Nathan, the reason we're saving the 130 essentially is because we have Bill Betts serving as interim, and it's kind of hard to explain because we want a full-time finance director. Like Eric said, a city our size, it is essential. Now, what I wonder though is, I know there were certain things in the past where we could almost put them on a parking lot, and the parking lot, like we could put that out there and then see where we fall. Because as we make decisions on each of these items, it's just a little different than it's been last year. So we might say, well, for now, we want to put that in or eliminate it, but as we get to the bottom of the list and kind of other things that aren't even on the list, we may want to tweak that. So, and I guess, here we are talking about a finance director, but whether or not, I guess at this time the council will vote yes or no. Do we want a finance director or not? Do we want to fund that line or not? But I just want to know if we can come back after we make that decision, because we might say, well, yes, we'd like to leave that in, but as we get to the bottom, we'll say, no, we've decided we'd rather have something else in. And two, I guess as a council, we need to make the decision, are we happy with the service that's being provided? And the hard thing is, having Bill sitting here, I can say clearly that we've had the best information we've ever had at our finance committee meetings. We've never had the amount of suggestions and input, and I think Sean, being finance chair, I'd be curious to hear his position on how Bill is doing. But it's hard when we're looking at that line item, talking about a position, and we have Bill sitting here who's been doing an excellent job. So I don't want to do a disservice to the city and say we're doing what on paper looks right by hiring a finance director, but in real life, in real time, Bill is actually doing better, and we could put the city at a disadvantage by giving that up. So I don't know if that makes sense. It's a delicate balance, and I might defer to Sean a little bit on that as well.
Thank you. Let me address the kind of the procedural with the budget. For example, if a council person was to say we want to take the $130,000 out of the budget at this particular time, make a motion. If there's a second to that, we would discuss it as a council. And then if that passed, that 130,000 would go then down to the contingency line item unless you had someplace else that you wanted to use that money for. And then later on during our discussions, if there's something that you wanted to fund, that money would be in contingency. And if you made a motion to, let's say, use 100,000 of that for another line item or another item within the budget, and there was a second, then we would discuss that, and you used the contingency as an offset account. Basically, you would be using that money from the 100 that came from the finance director that went to contingency, then to fund that line item. So there is an opportunity, I guess in short, there is an opportunity to later on use those funds then for another line item within the budget. With regard, my feeling with regard to the finance director, I agree with the mayor. I think a city that has a $66 million budget warrants a finance director. Bill and the staff in the finance department are doing a wonderful job, but I know they're worked pretty thin as well with everything that we're asking of them and all of the documents that they're asked to provide. I know Bill's trying to wear two hats, and so while they're doing a fabulous job, I do know that they're stretched, and so I do feel like we need a finance director position. So, other questions, comments, debate?
Well, just
Mr. Hussey.
for clarification, to remove something right now requires a motion, a second, and a vote. Silence on a topic doesn't necessarily give endorsement to it, does it? It just says, like, you know, I guess I'm thinking about if we want to tweak and debate these things, part of me wants to hear the mayor's explanation on all of these items and get through that process first and then take a look back. And I want to make sure we're not into a situation where it's perceived that if we make no motion to do anything on something like the finance director right now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the council has endorsed that or given consent to that inclusion in the budget. It's just a matter of we're kind of on a listening tour right now to hear that. Am I correct in that assumption that I'm making?
You are correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Next item, additional funding for street chemicals. Mayor.
I believe, if I am correct, I believe this amount is $100,000, and this would allow our street department to purchase chemicals, basically to make our bins whole, and as we go into 2014, and that's the reasoning behind it. I think Nathan had roughly, I think, $100,000 in his budget. I increased it to 200,000 in total, which I have a memo from staff that shows our bins, I think, are full at 217, and we have a little bit now, so we would start the year full as far as our chemicals.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Mr. Nicholas?
Not to disagree with the mayor, but just so that the council understands exactly, the bins are actually close to full now. So what I had in my budget would have filled the bins. The issue is there enough money in there to refill the bins if we use all of that during the winter? So it's really important that you understand what the difference between those two are.
Do you know, and I know we'll get to it when we talk about the, go ahead.
I just have a question for Mr. Marash as to how full our bins are.
Yeah, I think, you know, there is some salt in them, and Britt's here as well, but I believe they're right about half full is what they are, Nathan. So the extra, the 100 in the budget, we said would fill them up, and that handles about an average winter. So the additional 100 would be some additional insurance, if you will.
So, with the additional 100,000, basically we'd have 1.5 binfuls of material to use during 2014.
Yeah, that's correct, sir.
And typically, how much, and I know it's hard
Yeah,
based
it
on the winter, but
totally
typically,
depends.
what do we go through in a winter's time?
About a full bin full cycle. But that's very dependent on how many events you might have, you know, how large, how many days, that varies things. So you could have a lot of small snows and use just as much salt, or ice storms, or whatever you want to say. So it's just kind of depending, and we kind of mentioned to the mayor in our meeting that, you know, we could get by with the 100, but you know, if we start to see a lot of events, you know, we may have to come back to the council and ask for a supplemental.
And Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
just
sir.
to remind some of the newer members of the council and some of the veterans, if we look back at the 2013 2.0 budget, as we call it from time to time, we did take money out of chemicals, but it was also very late in the year where we kind of knew that, well, we don't have a whole lot coming up. But even then, we ended up with at least one snow in May. So, anyway, that's my reasoning. So,
Thank you. Any other, Mr. Mihalovich?
It's my understanding that some efficiencies were gained by calibrating the spreaders. Has that taken place, and do we feel like we've got as much efficiency out of our spreaders as possible?
Right. You know, they did recalibrate the spreaders. It helps some, but some of that is, you know, depending on the operator and the situation as well. So, I mean, I think they're good efficiency, and, you know, we'll look at doing that more often now. But yeah, they're operating well.
Other questions? Okay. Next item, add council security, $3,000. Mr. Mayor.
this was something that was taken out of the 2013 2.0 version. As you all may remember, I got with Bill. I believe Bill gave me the numbers as far as this would be for council meetings only, correct, Bill? And I think security's all around us, and I really think these chambers should be secure as we see other things in the city. Thank you.
Questions on council security? Okay. Defund Old Town Redevelopment Company, minus $5,000. Mayor?
This is actually an account that Phil Freeman asked me to, if we could take money from and add to the next line item, if I could discuss both of those at one time, Sean?
Sure.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I'm not used to being out here in this deal. That would allow them $20,000 roughly for down payment assistance that they're doing in the Old Town area. And I think it's their thought that I think they actually have maybe an extra $5, so it'd be looking at around $25,000 in total if this was to pass and be part of the 2014 budget. And that would allow them to do approximately 10 homes in Old Town. And by the way, the defunding, I'm sorry, the defunding of the 5,000, that's an administrative account that currently they're getting help from that from some of our local community-minded banks.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on items 9 and 10? Mr. Scrivener?
And maybe this is a question for Janice, but those funds you said fund approximately 10 homes. What is it, just to remind everyone, what is it exactly that Old Town is doing for those 10 homes?
This particular program is a residential down payment assistance program. It actually matches, this program would match the banks or the applicant's down payment. So it's kind of a 50-50 deal. If they put up $2,500 in down payment, then this program would match $2,500. It goes up to a maximum of $5,000.
And those homes, when we're not just giving down payments on homes, it's basically homes that are being restored back from multifamily to single family, or homes that are being rejuvenated.
They all have to be single family residential.
Initially, or they're being taken back to that state?
No, they just have to be single family in the Old Town district. they have to be built before 1950 and have a minimum market value.
Okay.
But it's to encourage, residency within the Old Town area. And this program also has the down payment or the property tax rebates in that line item as well.
Is there any other requirement like first-time homeowner or
It primarily is to assist first-time home buyers.
first-time home buyers? Okay.
Mr. Bray?
And one thing I would add, if I'm, Janice, let me know if I'm right on this, but the people that get that grant money, that help and assistance, they also agree to keep the building single family, that they're obligated to keep the building single family as well.
Mr. Scribner?
Is there any kind of payback or anything, or any residency requirements that they have to live in the home for a certain length of time or anything like that?
We ask them to live in the property for 5 years, and otherwise they would have to pay it back.
Are these generally homes that are in need of repair? Or they could be, it could be a home that's not in need of repair,
Well,
perhaps?
they're all older homes, you know, they're at least 50 years old, so they all need some maintenance, you know, and TLC. So this provides a little extra cash in someone's pocket, presumably, so that they can make some improvements.
And the maximum grant per home?
5,000.
5,000. Thank you.
That's the current maximum.
Mr. Hussey?
Janice, how long have we had this program?
It was established in 2007.
Okay. And do we have any statistics on, you mentioned the 5-year residency requirement. Have people held to that? Have we had anybody pay it back? Or what kind of success in terms of just increased property values and such?
I've known of about 5 that have had to pay back the funds because of relocation or you know, other situations where they had to sell the property.
But in your opinion, it's a wise investment in a program like this, or we see a good return on something like this?
Yeah, I think it has done a great benefit to areas of Old Town that need some attention, and I think it's a great idea to help bring people back into the Central City area. So it seems to be working pretty well. We partner that sometimes with if it's a homeowner that meets the income guidelines of the Community Development Block Grant Program, we can assist with some repairs that are needed. But usually on a purchase like this, the seller has to make the improvements to bring it up to where the bank will loan the money. So there aren't a lot of repairs that need to be made, but we can help with some energy efficiency improvements, and we've done that a few times.
Mr. Bray?
Just the other day, I got an email in support of these programs, and the comments are very brief, and I'd like to repeat them. This is from someone who's is participating in the program. She says, "My husband and I greatly appreciate the extra financial support received through the down payment assistance and the tax reimbursement programs offered by the City of Jefferson. With a project such as ours, it has been very helpful. Not only do these programs help potential Old Town property owners undertake a restoration project and bring life back into this area, but it demonstrates how the council is committed to helping to preserve the history in our community."
Thank you, Ralph. Mr. Scribner?
I guess what I want to try to get clear in my mind, Janice, is that in all cases, are these homes that need restoration of some sort, or let's say that a home is restored and it's in first-class shape, as a couple of them are over on West Main now, that someone has restored them. If that person after 5 years wants to sell it to a first-time home buyer, could that first-time home buyer go in and buy a home that had been restored and apply these funds to that purchase?
They could.
Okay.
There's no restriction on the in the program at this time on that. That hasn't happened yet, but.
I guess I can certainly see the benefit of taking homes that are being resurrected, if you will. I would think there might be a bit of dubiousness to applying those funds to a home that wouldn't be in that situation. It ought to stand on its own merit and support the sale on its own merit, I would think. But that's for another time.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Nicholas?
I just had a question for Ms. McMillan, and I apologize, I probably should have known this, but is the demand for this program increasing? Do we have adequate funds now, or what's the situation?
We have expended almost all of the funds that were allocated for this year. We have had some inquiries from the banks asking if we had funds for the program, and currently we could fund one more party with down payment assistance up to a maximum of $4,000, but that's the balance that we have in the account right now. So, as you know, for all intents and purposes, we're finished with the program for this year, unless we would have an applicant that had a qualified home. You know, we could assist one more, but it would only be up to about $4,000. And there, you know, the demand just rises and falls. It doesn't really seem to be consistent, but there is very definitely an interest in the community to keeping the program, because it does maintain an interest in the heart of our city. And so with the vacancy rate being a little higher in the central part of our city and the houses being older, it does, I think, offer a pretty good incentive for people to want to live in Old Town or in a central part of Jefferson City.
Thank you. Mr. Mihalovich?
Excuse me, could you verify the account numbers at 10 530 55030 and 550035? Is that what we're looking at? 550030 and 550035 under 10-530.
We're checking.
Has it been clarified that these accounts have been moved from non-departmental to planning and protective services?
That's correct.
Yeah, the specific project, or the one that we're talking about right now, is 550020 neighborhood reinvestment. And that's the residential program.
Other questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, we'll move on. Item 11, no raises, floating holidays. Mayor.
First of all, I think you just simply look around our economy as a whole. As I looked at the budget early on, Nathan did not have employee raises in his budget. And as I looked and looked and looked, I could not find that either. Nathan did have an idea about some floating holidays. However, I could not see the numbers adding up to what the true cost of that truly was. And due to that, I did not fund those.
Thank you. Questions? The council? Mrs. Carroll?
Thank you. I asked Nathan, and he sent an email with some ideas. I tried to brainstorm what we could come up with. Typically in the past we've done 1%, and I wondered, and Bill, you might have the number, what was the number? Right now it's 0. It doesn't show what it was and then what it is now. What was the previous amount from last year's increase?
I'm not sure I know exactly what question you're asking, but each percentage is roughly out of the general fund about $210,000 for each percentage. So last year there was a 2% raise there. So that
Okay.
hopefully gives you a
That
rough idea.
answers my question. So we're talking 400,000, over 400 last year. So what I wondered is if there's a way to still put something in the budget, reward employees for those who have been here longer, perhaps keep employee morale and things high, and as we are also competitive for our employees and also want to make sure that we retain the best staff and realizing what they do, a lot of our the people behind the scenes that do a lot of the work. So is there a way, because I'm sure as a council we want to find if there's a way, looking at and knowing the 400 and some thousand wouldn't be feasible, I asked Nathan, rather than a percent, maybe a 0.5%, what could we do? Even 0.5% still was a large number, so we looked at perhaps across the board, and we found a way that also could reward people for their years of service. So if we did a $225 raise if they had less than 5 years service, and $450 for those with more than 4 years service, would cost the general fund around $115,650 is the number Nathan provided. So I would like to see something in that line. I agree, in the past we've been at 1 or 2 or 3 or however many percent. So rather than that, we're going less than a 0.5%, but at the same time, at least it's something. So I would like to propose, I would move that we go with the across the board, the numbers I just mentioned, for a total of $115,650.
I need an offset account for that.
For now, we'll do contingency fund.
In the proposed budget, there's 72,000 in the contingency. So we'll need an additional, can't do the math in my head real quick, 45,000?
Well, could take it out of finance director and we could delay that for that many months of a search.
Okay.
Or, I mean, that I don't think that I would choose that, being on the spot. I would say that, but I think perhaps, we talked about the street chemicals. If I took a portion out of street, why don't I do the street chemicals instead of the finance director? We'll take the remaining 45,000 out of that.
Okay, so it's my understanding that you're making a motion to add a pay increase to employees, 115,000, I'm sorry, Ms. Carroll.
$115,650.
$650, that you would deplete the contingency fund of $72,113.71, and then the balance, 42,000 and some hundreds, would come out of the street chemical line items. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Additional discussion. No discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please. Nope. Mr. Hussey.
You know, I think Councilwoman Carroll's on to something. I think it's nice to put something in there, whether it's a pay raise or the floating holiday piece at some point. I think that we run the risk of sending a message to the employees that we are holding vacancies open, asking more of them, and pushing at the same time without, any compensation back. And if you look at some of the increases here, while they're worthy programs and it's nice to have more chemicals, or you can start to pick down some of these things, an extra $15,000 for a neighborhood incentive program. Those are nice things to have, but a quality staff that feels appreciated and respected by the council, I think, is important. I think we've pushed them in some ways on the vacancy side of things. We're asking quite a bit, and I think this is a modest way to say thank you and at least show some appreciation to keep them headed in the right direction. As we all know, salaries that hold flat really are falling behind a little bit, the way the economy works. And so this just tries to keep us moving in the right direction in a small way. So thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Bray?
Well, I think it's important to also recognize that there have been a lot of flat salaries, you know, in the last 5 years, but But the city has not experienced that. City employees. What has been going on for the last 5 years are furloughs and layoffs and plant closings. And so I think, and we have a tight budget this year, and we need vacancy savings, and we need chemicals, and I think we have to recognize we need to recognize that the city employees have good reason to appreciate that they have not been furloughed and have not been laid off and have not lost their jobs.
Other discussion? Mr. Nicholas?
I just wanted to clarify what's in there now. The no raises floating holidays is 0 is because the cost of the floating holidays was $7,500. That's a hard cost, and that's already in the budget. So approving the floating holidays or leaving those in the budget doesn't have any fiscal impact. There's a 0 cost as the budget is written today, the mayor's budget.
I have to disagree with Nathan on the $7,500 cost. I've never believed in that number, and that's one reason I didn't put floating holidays in my version of the budget. If I would have honestly believed that 2 floating holidays for our city employees would only cost $7,500, I would have put it in there. But I simply don't believe that number.
Mr. Scrivener?
Mr. Nicholas, would you do me and maybe some of the listening public a favor and explain exactly how floating holidays would work? I've heard that term, but I don't know how many people sitting here really understand exactly how they would, in practice, how they would work.
Sure, it's easy to explain. Each employee would get 2 days a year that they could take any time during the year. They would not all take those at the same time, with the exception of transit. I'll come back to them in the end because they're a little different. But they would take those at whatever time that they chose. Their supervisors would try and spread that out so that, you know, there wasn't any time when we were short. So they essentially work like 2 extra vacation days. However, because they're not vacation days, there's no cost if they don't use those. They just lose them, and so there's no cost on. Now, the reason that the number is 7,500 is because so in most departments there's no cost at all for doing the floating holidays. It's just as if the employees decided to take 2 extra vacation days, which most of them have plenty of, and they could do that anyway. However, with the fire department, because we have the union contract that requires constant manning, in that case, when an employee is gone, we do have to backfill those positions, so you would have to use some overtime. We think that the $7,500 is more than enough, and we kind of asked the chief and to come up with the number, what he thought enough overtime to cover the vacancies that he would experience would be, and that's where we got the $7,500. For transit, because they can't have some of their employees take off, you know, at different times, they need all their employees every day to run. What they would do is they would take off the 2 days. Right now, city employees have 2 fewer holidays than state employees. So they would take off the 2 holidays that the state employees are already taking off, which is usually pretty slow because pretty much Jeff City shuts down during those state holidays. And so they would take off those 2 all at the same time.
Mr. Scrivener?
So what you were proposing is to add these 2 holidays in lieu of pay raises and in lieu of just as a gesture to employees. Is that what your thinking was?
Yes, I would agree. I think with what Councilman Hussey had said. Sorry. You know, we have asked a lot of our employees. Every department right now is running shorthanded, and so every employee is having to work harder. And, what I told the employees, I met with all the employees, and I told them, I said, you have to understand that as the budget was looking at that time, certainly, there was not any money for raises. However, we need to do something to show them that we value them and that we care about them and that we appreciate the sacrifices we are asking them to make. Because ultimately, as I've said over and over and over, this is a service business, and if we don't keep the morale of our employees high, service will suffer, and if service suffers, then we're not doing our job. I'm not doing my job as an administrator in providing the best service to the citizens of the city.
So your assertion is that because you're not staffing for that employee to be gone, they're just gone, the work doesn't get done, or someone else does it in their place, but you're not adding an employee during that time. Your assertion is there's no cost to the city other than the absence of the employee.
That is, and the argument's been made.
No hard cost.
Right, there's no hard cost. There's clearly no hard cost. From an accounting point of view, the number is $7,500. There's no getting around that. You can make the argument there's a productivity cost. I would assert there is no productivity cost. And my argument here is this. State employees already get off those 2 extra holidays. I don't think anyone in this room would argue that state employees are less productive than city employees. And so I don't believe there's any productivity loss at all. In fact, I would argue that by keeping morale of our employees high and showing them that we care and respect them, we will actually increase productivity, not decrease it.
I think it's hard to argue, unless you are overstaffed, that you can have people be gone and not suffer some productivity loss. How can you have someone be gone and not suffer productivity loss?
Well, it's already happening. We have employees right now, because we are short of employees. The employees have learned to cover for that, and we are making adjustments. The problem is that when you're working them that extra hard all the time, you've got to give them some kind of a reward. What happens is that everybody else in the department, just like if somebody takes a vacation day or a sick day, which occur right now, it's no different than those. We get through. The rest of the people pick it up, and you don't see any loss in productivity.
So are you proposing this as a one-time temporary thing in lieu of a pay raise with going back to the normal holiday schedule next year, assuming that there's the funds for a pay raise next year?
No, I would propose it to be a permanent thing. The council has talked, on a number of occasions. We've discussed adding holidays. We could not afford in this budget to add holidays. If I let everyone off, then the cost, if you let everyone off on the same day, the cost is greater because you have to pay public safety and other people, and you have overtime and holiday pay. But with the floating holidays, you don't have any of that. So it allows us to do what the council has attempted to be doing for many, many years now, but with no cost. So it's a win-win.
Thank you for clarifying that for me. I don't know, everyone else may have understood it, but it's the first time I've actually had that explanation.
Mr. Hilpert?
I was just it's probably a moot point at this point, but the motion on the floor was about the pay raises and the offset. And while it's kind of the same line item, it might be cleaner to dispose of that motion first, and then you can talk about the pay raises. And of course, someone else has a motion they want to make on the same subject, they can do that again as well.
Thank you. Mr. Scribner?
Just on this issue that's on the floor, I understand the need for a finance director, and I understand the size of the city and the size of the budget and everything. But I guess from my standpoint, if we are desperate for finding funds, and Bill probably will hate me for saying this because I do think he's stretched very thin right now, but I do think they've done an excellent job, he and Sheila and their staff. And I think that, quite frankly, if we have to find money somewhere, either delaying, as Carrie suggested, or even waiting a year to hire a finance director, I would be comfortable with that. I'm not sure that the community is all that comfortable right now, and obviously Sean and the mayor are not that comfortable with that idea, but to me that is a place where we can get by. And I'm not saying it's the ideal solution, but it's a place that we can get by for a while longer, at least in my mind.
Other questions? Mr. Bray?
Well, I feel like I've been led down this road before. and I would call some of this, in my mind, where it's kind of smoke and mirrors, or how far back does, who remembers voodoo economics? Anyway, I don't believe in some of the things, some of the explanations here. I say I've been led down the road before.
Mr. Schulte,
Mr. Mayor?
on, are you on the floating holiday now or not? I'm kind of confused, I guess.
We are on the motion right now, Mrs. Carroll's motion to fund $115,650 in pay raises.
In a pay raise, right?
Yes, sir.
So you're not currently on the floating holiday?
No.
I do have information to add to that if and when you come back to that.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Any other discussion on the motion that's on the floor? Mrs. Carroll?
And I would like the motion to proceed. I do think there might be some room, and this could be later, but Bob made some good points that perhaps we could tweak, let's say, instead of contingency. I mean, everything now has to be an equal offset, but as we go through it, we may make that point. And like Ken said, this isn't automatic approval or not, so we may take that eventually out of, I mean, I'm just trying to make the council more comfortable with that flexibility. It may come out of half a year of a finance director, which may take us that long anyway to find one, and then put it back in contingency. So I'm flexible on any of that. Thank you.
Okay. I understand the motion on the floor currently, though, is contingency and chemicals, street chemicals. Mr. Henry?
This question is for Nathan. Nathan, when's the last time city employees did not have a pay raise?
You know, we looked at that, and we don't know of a time. I mean, certainly not in the last 20 years.
Thank
We've always had pay raises.
Other discussion regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Branch,
No.
Bray,
No.
Carroll,
Aye.
Graham,
Nay.
Henry,
Nay.
Hussey,
Aye.
Mahalovich,
Nay.
Prather, Schulte,
Nay.
Scrivener.
Aye.
Six no, 3 yes.
6 no, 3 yes, the motion fails. Further discussion on floating holidays. Mr. Mayor, you wanted to make a comment?
I would just like to point out in a memo that you all received and I received also, I'd asked Nathan to get me what I thought were the true cost of some of these holidays. And to me, whether the $7,500 is the exact number or it's $20,000, to me it was kind of more of a principle issue of something going from a day of productivity for our city and for our taxpayers to an extra day of benefit for an employee. I don't have a problem with the second part. However, I know in my business, the more free time I give our employees, that's less time that we're productive filling orders and taking care of customers, and it would be the same for the city. The personnel cost to operate a normal business day, and these are Nathan's words, a normal business day for the general fund is $84,000 rounded, okay? That roughly, I'm assuming a day, so it'd be times 2 is roughly $168,000. If I heard Nathan correctly, this might be for, first of all, there's not a motion on the floor about this, correct?
That is correct.
But was it his intention to make this permanent?
In answer to Mr. Scrivener's question, I believe the answer was yes.
Okay.
Additional discussion on floating holidays. Mr. Scrivener?
Just a question. How many employees, what are the 270? I can't remember. I ought to know better.
Citywide, there's, we usually use the number 425.
425.
There's less than that now, but that's usually the number we use.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Carroll?
So could you clarify, we're talking now to keep the floating holidays in or out? What is the motion, or what, not, there's not even a motion. What are we, you're talking, the mayor wants to delete those?
Actually, I did not have them in my budget, period, so they
So
shouldn't.
they were in and now they're not?
They shouldn't be in there. Correct, Bill?
So it's my understanding in the city administrator's budget, he proposed floating holidays, and it was the mayor's intention to not have floating holidays in his budget. Now, Mr. Betts, financial, money-wise for the line item, is there money there or is there money not there?
There is money in the fireman's line item to cover $7,500 for the floating holidays.
Okay, so it was the mayor's intention
Correct.
to be out, so is there a
But let me
credit of
ask Bill,
$7,500?
is there any doubt in your mind that I had not planned on covering
No,
that? And it was something that was overlooked, right?
Correct. I
Okay.
clearly believe that the mayor they are not in the mayor's, but even though the funding's there, I do not think it was his intention or his proposal to the council to have the two floating holidays.
And if I don't know how else to put this, Sean, sorry, this is kind of new to me. If it's the 11th hour and I have $7,500 more in the budget that wouldn't go towards floating holidays, I would increase contingency if I had that choice now. But obviously, if it's there, you guys can do what you want. But
Well, we're working on the mayor's proposed budget, and so this is as I indicated earlier, a living document, and if that's your prerogative. So if there's if it was a miscommunication while the budget was being prepared, then I would say, if that's your proposal, then the contingency fund needs to increase by $7,500, if that's your wishes, and then the council can debate it as we are now. Mr. Hussey?
Just a quick point. It seems like there's discussion about the 7,500 that's needed in the fire department. Sounds like the mayor and the city administrator disagree on the other funding. To me, this almost doesn't seem like a budget conversation, because one could argue that if you gave the two floating holidays in the budget to all staff, there's no line item on all these employees that has to be filled in terms of there's not an extra cost incurred. There's a productivity cost, and one could claim that productivity goes down, but our salary going out is still the same amount of money. And so I almost feel like this conversation almost has to be a separate conversation about benefits policy, in the terms of if we were going to add in, say we're going to do the two floating holidays and building on the mayor's comments earlier, $84,000 to operate a day, would we add $168,000 to the budget, and where will we put it? Because essentially we don't need an additional $168,000 in the budget to staff that time. The argument is about productivity loss. And so I guess I would say it seems very unclear, and I understand the intention, but it almost seems like it needs to be a separate conversation about benefits and vacation time in this regard and the holiday time, independent of the budget conversation. Because, you know, if Mr. Nicholas feels like it doesn't require increased funding other than the fire department, he could then, you know, in his mind, award floating holidays without an impact on the bottom line of the budget. And I guess we can spin our wheels here and go round and round and round on this issue, and maybe I think it has to be a separate conversation regarding the implementation of a floating holiday, whether we do it or not, just as you would have a conversation about vacation hours, other benefits that are offered to city staff. And so I don't see a clear resolution. If somebody wants to put floating holidays back in, I don't even know what number I would throw up there.
Well, and I guess, and I agree with you, it probably is a policy decision, but it does impact the budget by $7,500, so that's why it's being discussed. It's not a net zero issue, and so it probably would be better to have it vetted through the finance committee or administration committee, but it does impact the budget by $7,500. So in order for us to get it to balance, we need to do something with that $7,500. Either leave it in or take it out. Mr. Mihalovich.
Is there any discussion with regard to the desirability of the staff to have floating holidays versus the 2 extra holidays that the state gets that our staff does not?
I have not done any scientific study, but I have talked with, I think I've talked with virtually every city employee. The consensus actually seems to be that they would prefer the floating holidays to fixed holidays.
Okay, then with that, well, I think the cost is theoretically still in the budget for the floating holidays. So what would happen today if we passed the mayor's budget?
Let me interject here for a second, and Mayor, jump in here. It's the mayor's
don't-
intention for the 7,500 not to be in his budget. It's not reflected here, but that's
Right.
his intention. So I think it's fair to adjust the mayor's proposed budget and show a minus 7,500 in that column in lieu of 0, and then adjust contingency, and then we can go about the discussion. Thank you, Greg.
And Sean, at this point in time, as you look at these budgets for 6 months like I have, you could do a lot of different things with that $7,500. You could take it and you could put more towards a camera person for JCTV and the community events that Kerry talked about. You could put it in contingency. I think at this point in time, I could do a lot of different things with it if I would have still realized that it was in there, but it's just kind of news to me. So with that being said, I would put it in contingency.
Thank you. Greg, would you go ahead and adjust reduced contingency plan at the bottom to minus 42? Okay. Sheila, reduce that one to 42.5, please. So we're balanced. Thank you. Other discussion? I know this is a little confusing, but we can always come back to it.
Wouldn't you
Yeah,
be
you're-
increasing the contingency, or is that just the?
It was a reduction of 50, so we're adding 75 to it, so it would be a minus. Mr. Hussey.
Well, I'll make the motion to do the opposite. I'll make the motion to take $7,500 from contingency and apply it to floating holidays. 2 floating
Okay.
holidays per staff.
We have a motion on the floor.
Second.
Is there a
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Mr. Scrivener.
I'm a little confused because your first action was just to correct that. Okay, so that didn't require a motion, and now the motion is to put it back.
The first correction was to get it to the intent of the mayor's proposed budget.
Okay.
So now Mr. Hussey has made the correction to add it
Okay,
back.
my
And the reason is
question
there's contingency
for
funds on there
Mr. Nicholas
twice,
then.
is why it's
Right.
kind of confusing.
I've just been doing a little math as I've been sitting here. So in case people think I am texting, I'm using my calculator on my phone. So I've been doing a lot of button punching here, but that's what I've been doing. I'm calculating 1,200 hours at 2 days per employee for 75 firemen, right? Is that the way it works?
I would defer to the chief.
We're required to maintain the 19 at minimum manning. So in the event that somebody would take a day off, try to answer your question without going around it.
Sure.
But more than likely what would happen is we would, A, be at full manning, that the assistant chief didn't have anybody off on that specific day, that person would be allowed just to be off. Or B, that they would possibly, instead of taking a vacation day, they would bank that vacation day and take the holiday.
Okay, so there's a possibility that you would have more than your minimum staffing on duty in any given day, even, so if someone took off, it wouldn't really
It wouldn't
affect-
take us below the 19 that's required.
Okay, so you wouldn't have any overtime on that particular day. I was trying to reconcile in my mind how $7,500 could cover
That-
70-some firemen
And that
for
happens,
1,200
that
hours.
happens throughout the year, that we are at what we refer to as a full staffing on those shifts. In the event that, of course, that somebody had planned that day off and we went below that, it would require somebody to come in on constant manning and overtime and potentially cost step up. So it was a estimate that, $7,500 would cover those 2 days.
Okay, and then my calculations for the full contingent of employees, which would, I guess, include firemen as well, 16 hours, 2 days, 425 employees, 6,800 hours. If you can apply whatever is the average, but if you apply $25 an hour, which is, I'm sure, less than the average perhaps, if that's 170,000. But again, those dollars aren't required because, as you said, you don't staff up for those people being gone. I tend to, maybe it's an effort to throw a bone or something, I don't know, but I tend to support the idea of the extra 2 days. I don't know if I support them in perpetuity or not, but if we can't give a pay raise, that's a pretty inexpensive way to kind of put a little salve on it, maybe. So, I know it's you can't discount the fact that you're losing productivity, though. I don't think it zeroes out. I don't think it's a zero-sum game, because if you do believe that you can replace 6,800 hours, that is an awful lot of time that if you can do without that, you probably can do without some employees. It would be my assumption.
Mr. Mayor?
I have a question first of you, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to follow up. Is this a one-time deal? Is it just for this year?
I suppose we are not adjusting policy here. We're approving the 2014 budget. So if it's not included in the 2015 budget, we're not changing policy.
In other words, what I'll ask Mr. Hussey, he made the motion. Is this for 2014 only?
Correct. I made a motion to modify the 2014 budget, and that was it.
So if it wouldn't happen next year, I may ask Nathan, would he rather have these as opposed to raises down the road if it came to that?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Raises down the road being when?
Never mind. I was thinking earlier that it was going to be longer than 2014. If it's just 2014, that would obviously answer that.
Thank you. Mr. Bray?
I move to postpone this motion to the next budget meeting.
Okay, I'm going to have help with this one. What's Robert's Rules of Order?
It requires a second.
I'll second for discussion.
Have a motion and a second to postpone discussion until the next.
I don't.
And if I may speak.
Man, I hate
the
to
next
say
meeting.
this, but I don't. I'd have to look it up. I'm not sure that's a proper motion to postpone a currently pending motion. I think you have to dispose of that. Is it on there? All right.
Yeah, I read it right off of the.
It'd be to lay it on the table.
Well, may I
Mr.
speak
Bray?
in favor of my motion?
Yes.
We're about 10 minutes from winding up tonight, and I don't think we're all thinking the same thing. I don't think we're all talking about the same thing. I think there's a lot of confusion, and I just don't think we're ready to vote, and we're headed right there, and I think it's a train wreck. I would ask that we're within 10 minutes. Let's just stop here, postpone till the next meeting to pick this up when we come back, and by that time, I'm sure that we can come back with a better understanding of what I'm listening to and what we're talking about. So that's why I suggest we postpone this to the next budget meeting.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor to postpone this till the next budget meeting. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Branch,
Yes.
Bray,
Yes.
Carroll,
No?
Graham,
No.
Henry,
No.
Hussey,
No.
Mahalovich,
No.
Schulte,
No.
Scrivener.
No.
Okay, that motion failed, so we're still back on the motion on the floor to include floating holidays. Further discussion on the motion. Mr. Bray?
I think a couple of folks have said it already. The purpose of this, what we're doing right now is setting the annual budget. I don't think that the discussion of holiday, I don't think this is a proper venue to discuss holidays. I think that probably ought to start in the administration committee and ought to be a very different conversation at a different time. And I would be happy to discuss it at that time. Also, Councilman Hussey, you were, I think, I thought you were talking a while ago. I think you made that point a while ago also. But you made the motion to, but then you made the motion to discuss it. Am I, and I'm only asking for clarification.
No, I certainly made that point earlier, but it was made clear to me that if we don't put $7,500 back in the budget, that there's really no conversation to be had. And so I'm just trying to get to that point, and put that money in there for the floating holidays regarding, to cover the fire department expenses. It seems like there's disagreement about whether or not there's an actual cost, and my point was, I'm not exactly sure what number I would put up there if I wanted to authorize floating holidays, and my assumption is that I don't have to put a number up there because there's not really anywhere in the budget that you put a line item. And so I would still have to defer back, and you put the $7,500 in for the floating holidays, and I think really what we're putting the money in there is to cover related to the fire department. Now, if somebody wants to bring up a policy discussion, and I'm not sure if that would require modification to a policy manual that we have, if the floating holidays already exist within there, and it's just carrying forward what practice is today, I would need clarification. But I wanted to make sure that we got the $7,500 in there to cover that aspect, because that's the direct cost aspect that's been declared to us by Mr. Betts and Mr. Nicholas.
Mr. Hilpert?
I would think that the process would be that if the motion passes and there's sufficient money in the budget, then to actually, there is in our personnel policy manual list of holidays, so you'd almost have to amend that. But if the motion passes, then the council can do that either as part of the budget process or through the administration committee, and that may all be done about the same time. And, you know, if it's the will of the council at that time, we would just say during the year of 2014. I think you could do those two things concurrently, but I think Councilman Hussey is correct that unless you put the money in now, you'd have to amend the budget later on, put the money back in later on.
Mr. Scrivener?
I agree with what you're going to say, or what you just said. Although I think, as far as a matter of process goes, especially with such a small amount, $7,500, I would prefer that we follow the process like Councilman Bray has outlined, and that is take it through the committee process, discuss the amending the personnel policy for this year or for however long, and then at that time, if we see that we need an additional $7,500, amend the budget at that time. We do supplemental appropriations, we do budget amendments, we do them all the time, and you can do them any time throughout the year. So since we're mixing budget and policy discussion here, I think the appropriate thing would be to not put the $75 or $7,500 in. I'm going to vote against it at this time. Doesn't mean I won't vote for it at a later time, but I think that we should go through the process and address the policy issue as a point that Councilman Hussey made. We're really blending the two, a policy discussion and a budget discussion, although budgets are policy. They're a way of enacting policy. But I think the appropriate process would be to leave the $7,500 out at this time and then amend it later if we decide that it will be appropriate to do the holidays after you go through administration committee or however it is that you want to do it.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? I would just say, Mr. Scrivener, I agree with your assessment. I do think it needs to be a policy issue. It needs to be vetted through a committee, through administration, and I think we need to leave it as the mayor has proposed in his budget, and then take it up as a policy decision at a later date. So I intend to vote no as well. Mr. Scrivener?
And we have plenty of time to do that. I mean, there'll be at least 2 or 3 administration committee meetings between now and the 1st of November.
Correct. Other discussion?
Mr. Chairman. Sean.
Mr. Mayor?
I agree with you and Bob and Ralph. I think this is something, if you're going to change this big a policy, I don't think it's something that you necessarily do in a budget process. If you as a council truly want to change the policy, I think going through the committee process as we do everything else would probably be best. And at that point in time, if you decided to make them permanent, you could have all those discussions Plus, I think it would give staff a lot more time, or the public to weigh in also, but staff more time to show exactly how many other communities have these and how this would stack up to other compensation plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I've been asked that the motion be reread, please.
Mr. Hussey moved to take $7,500 from the contingency fund and apply it to the fire department staffing for 2 floating holidays.
Thank you. Further discussion? Roll call, please.
Branch,
No.
Bray,
No.
Carroll,
Aye.
Graham,
Aye.
Henry,
Aye.
Hussey,
Aye.
Mahalovich,
No.
Schulte,
No.
Scrivener.
No.
5-4.
Yes, 5 no.
5-4, motion fails. We have 5 minutes left. Let's move on to the new items that were discussed earlier. Addition of the UHC wellness line item. Mr. Mayor, do you have any comments that you'd like to make on that?
No, I'll try to, what do you have, 5-10 minutes left, Sean?
Yes, sir.
I can run through these pretty quick. Bill, can you help me from the sidelines there if you would? This is simply a program that I understand from staff that was funded in other areas before. It did not have its own line item. Bill asked that we add it as a line item, and I agree with that.
Comments, questions on the additional $25,000 as an expense to the budget? Seeing none, we'll move on to defund patch truck, minus $60,000. Mr. Mayor?
That was an item that Public Works, we were going through the budget. I had told them at the time kind of where things were obviously at, and we had a little bit different picture at that time. I told them that I was not going to fund this. Later we found some additional funding, and I did put it back in the budget after the R.R. Donnelly thing here just in the last week and a half. Obviously your priorities change, mine did too. I took that out, and not to skip down, but I also took down a fire vehicle for an assistant chief vehicle. I've talked to some members of the fire department on my reasoning about that, and there again it was just simply due to funding.
Thank you, Mayor. Any questions or discussion regarding the patch truck? Seeing none, since he mentioned the fire vehicle, any questions regarding the defunding of the fire vehicle? Mr. Scrivener?
You know, I assume these vehicles were needed to initially, are we gonna just get by, I guess, on the patch truck? Do you have a truck that's working now and you're able to get by, or?
Right, it's one of our older trucks, and it's a used everyday type truck, and it is showing age. You know, it may run into some repairs. It hasn't yet thus far, but it could. It's one in need of replacement.
And the assistant fire chief vehicle, is that what's the situation there?
Much like Mr. Marash, this was an item that was discussed last year during the start of the last year's budget process, but never made the process simply because we thought we could make it another year. But I mean, you're just basically delaying it again is what you're doing.
Okay,
So
I mean, it is a functioning vehicle. It's just maybe getting to the point.
It's a vehicle that's you're behind from scheduling to be rotated through with. I think that it would replace a 1990 Suburban.
1990.
And that's at a station, so we rotate our vehicles through.
Okay, thank you.
Stand corrected.
Mr. Graham?
Matt, what's the total number of patch trucks do we have in the city?
Basically one patch truck.
Mr. Bray?
Matt, would you let me know what is a patch truck?
It's the truck that drives about and fills potholes, basically. So it's used winter, summer, all year long. In the winter, it uses a cold mix, but in the summer, it'd have hot mix in it. But kind of a stop and start vehicle. I believe it's an 02. You know, it's been in service year round.
Okay. Thank you, Matt.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Mayor?
My reasoning on both of these are simply that after talking to staff again, that we thought that, you know what, we could probably make it one more year without, and I'll be the first one during 2014. If we end up with more money and they need them, we can obviously replace them at that point in time, but that's why I left them out.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Scrivener?
You know, any funds that we don't use end up in contingency, and that's what contingency's for. So in my mind, if you have a contingency fund that's more than the value of a truck, if your truck breaks down or if your truck, you know, begins to limp to the point that you have to go ahead and purchase it, that's why you have contingency funds. So it's not like you're left with no option. If something should occur, you would hope that it didn't, then you're great. You don't have to use your contingency money. But so I think, you know, the idea that we delay the patch truck, it may not be the ideal situation, but it's certainly a workable situation in a tight budget.
Well put. Mr. Nicholas?
Well, I just have a question. There's been some talk about speaking with fire employees and with public works employees, but I haven't heard those two directors say they support these. I just would like to ask them, do they support the defunding of these two vehicles, and were they consulted on them?
I can answer the first part of that. Yes,
I'd like them to answer that question.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the mayor represented it well in our meeting with him. He did leave it in initially, but then had to take it out later, we found. But you know, like we've told him, you know, and I have a presentation, I guess, that we'll be doing eventually for the whole group. But one of our main concerns is, you know, the aging fleet, our parts budget, and CM. So those two are related things. We did say, you know, the patch truck is running, and if it breaks down, we'll fix it, and we understand it's a tight budget. So,
thank you, Mr. Turner.
Again, during our meeting with the mayor during the process, I believe it was in June, we were informed that it would be removed. At some point during that time, it was refunded at a point, and then I believe in a conversation that I had with the mayor just prior to this meeting starting is when I found out that it wouldn't be funded. So,
thank you. Further discussion? Okay, I would like to let's talk about the defund the vacant street position, $50,000, and then we will, with a motion, we'll adjourn after. Or Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
I have a favor to ask, if at
Okay.
all possible. I'm not sure exactly when your next meeting is.
Okay.
And due to that, I was going to ask by chance if we could go ahead and hit the other two items that we have.
Without objection from the council?
At least so I could introduce them.
Okay.
You obviously may not get them
Great.
fully debated.
Great.
But
See no objection? Go ahead.
okay.
We're on the vacant street position.
I'll let Nathan answer that. That was one that him and Bill had came up with, or unless Bill wants to.
Mr. Betts?
I will answer it. What the vacant street position is, again, is there's some vacant positions that we held open in 2013 in order to meet our vacancy savings plan, and a street position was one of those positions that the city administrator had authorized to be funded November 1st, and in the initial budget for the mayor, he had authorized to be funded on November 1st. Since then, we had the R.R. Donnelly thing, and we were looking for funding, and this was one of the options that was put forth to the mayor and that he chose. So,
Questions? Mr. Scrivener?
I know that we're going to go to individual departments, but just while we're on this topic, tell us a little bit about this position, what they do, and what kind of a strain it puts on. How long has this been vacant and so forth?
I think right now, I think we were down 3 positions this year, and so we're getting ready to hire one back. And initially in the budget, it was our understanding one would remain unfunded, and then after the new budget, we would replace the other person. So this one would be now we'd be just remaining 2 open at the street division. The exact number of employees in that budget escapes me. I have it here handy, but it's I think it's 25, isn't it, Britt? 24 in the budget. So it'd be 2 vacancies in that department. Obviously, the main thing is, you know, we work these people in crews, so we're modifying our workloads, and you know, quite frankly, you know, it's less a crew basically, 2 guys. We would be slower getting back to and responding to various things. But that being said, there's still a crew there.
So do these employees man trucks during snow events?
Correct. On the one down, we felt we could keep the same snow routes. Probably 2 down, we may go back and have to modify our routes to accommodate.
So you're authorized 24 and you have 22. And you were going to replace one, or you have 21 and we're going to replace one?
According to Britt, we had 24, so we were going to be down just once. That'd be 23. Now with this, we'd be to 22 out of the 24.
Okay.
Additional questions? Seeing none, fund 1/2 year fire chief. Mayor?
Bill, would you like to tell the rest of the class approximately what time today we found out about this 70,000?
We one of the things that we were concerned about was property taxes, and we had gotten an initial letter from Mr. Register's office that indicated to us that the property taxes were going to be lower, the assessed values were going to be lower than what we had received in years past. We received the latest letter after Board of Equalization and after the state had certified the numbers, and with those certifications we actually went above what we thought we needed. So initially we'd asked the mayor to project his numbers down $70,000 for the property tax, but today at about 2:30, I believe, somewhere in that vicinity, we got the letter, maybe even 3 o'clock. So we got the number, and so we gave that. I gave the mayor a call and informed him that we felt that we could bump the property taxes or leave the property taxes at the 4.6 million, so to not get rid of the $70,000.
And just so you know, this time of year when you get calls from Bill right before one of these meetings, you have a tendency to cringe just because you're not sure what he's getting ready to tell you. But this was good news today, and I looked at this. I contacted not everyone on the council. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do that. I did reach out to our public safety chair, Mr. Prather. I won't try to quote him because I can't bring up his email, but I told him my reasoning was basically I thought somewhere during the 2014 mid to late there would probably be a need for us to hire a full-time chief or to hire a replacement chief for Chief Rennick, who was with us for 33 years. And I think that's a huge priority. Obviously, public safety is to our community. And since that money came in, that's what I decided to do literally in the 11th hour. However, the reason I made that choice was because early on when I looked at the budget, I had a list of positions that I thought would be critical to fill, and finance director was number 1 and our fire chief was number 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Any questions regarding half-year funding?
And I should
fire
say
chief?
vacant positions, by the way.
Mr. Hussey?
I just have a quick question for the mayor. I know in your initial budget you had a contingency fund of $120,000 or so, and Mr. Nicholas offered $50,000. We're reducing it in this regard to fund the fire chief at a halftime. Was there any thought to funding the fire chief initially in your budget halftime? Since we're going to drop the contingency fund to
Actually, I can answer that, Mr. Hussey. No, and the reason being because at that time we did not have the funding to do a fire chief at halftime. So not early on. I mean, as Bill will tell you, the revenue numbers have changed 4 or 5 times roughly. So I mean, this has been a moving target the whole time. So no.
Mr. Scrivener?
I'm a little bit confused, and I hope that I'm not the only one in the room with as many things as we've added and subtracted. But it almost seems like we're treating this 70,000 as additional revenue, and it really is not additional revenue. It's just offsetting revenue, isn't it? I mean, the Donnelly money is gone, so that's 70,000 off, but you found offsetting revenue of 70 is the way I'm understanding this at least. So it's not really 70,000 additional money, it's just 70,000 that's making you whole so you don't have to take the cut. So I don't understand where we're coming up with 70,000 for a half year of fire chief, unless you're taking it out of contingency funds.
I don't know that I can totally. I agree with exactly what you said there. I think maybe the confusion was on Monday nights when we shared with the mayor that we were concerned because of the Board of Equalization meetings that we were going to get an assessed value down lower, and so at that time we asked him if we could reduce the revenue $70,000 for property tax, and we shared why. And we didn't think we would have the letter by today. To be honest, we received the letter today, which made us come to the realization that we didn't need to reduce that. So we gave that back to the mayor, and with that time, he chose that instead. So I think part of what you're saying is true, is that he may have chose a little bit of money from contingency instead of bumping contingency back up to 122. He did decide to go with the fire chief route, which was a decision that he made. It's his budget, so we have no qualm with that.
Yeah, I'm not arguing whether that's good or bad. I'm just saying it's really not coming from $70,000 new money. It's new money, but it really offsets money you lost. So
sure.
You're starting from the same point, and the only way you can fund the fire chief or anything else additional to be more than what you were funding previously is to take it out of contingency or take it out of some other program, because that 70's not new money. It's just making you whole.
That's fair. Yes.
Okay.
And to that point, Bob, if I could, Mr. Chairman, at the same time, the R.R. Donnelly money was not in the original budget, as you know, and our contingency was higher, so you could say the R.R. Donnelly money technically came out of contingency also. So I see your argument, but it could go both ways.
Mr. Hussey? No? Any other discussion? Mr. Mihalovich?
Since you're talking about property tax, was there impact on our property tax with result to R.R. Donnelly, and if so, why was that adjustment not made within our revenue projections?
There will not be any impact for fiscal year FY14, but there definitely will be for FY15. So,
Mr. Scrivener?
That's what we were just talking about. I mean, there's no impact because of this extra 70,000 that wasn't anticipated, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
no, maybe I misunderstood your question earlier. That has nothing. This 70,000 isn't an impact. We actually had felt. What happens, just to give you guys real quick of the process, is we get a letter from Mr. Register's office, and it says this is what your assessed value is. That letter comes in about mid-July, so it's well after we've kind of projected what we think the property tax fund should be. But what happens is that they actually have to get some certifications. There's a Board of Equalization to where property taxes are adjusted up or down or whatnot. People have the right. The state does something similar with railroad and utilities. And we don't know what those numbers are until that's state certified. So we received more funding, more assessed values from those two boards than what we had initially thought from the initial letter. The newest letter that came today gave us roughly $22 million more in assessed value. So that's where the 70,000 came from. We never took R.R. Donnelly into account for property tax in 14. Certainly looking at the 15, we do realize that there's going to be some changes there.
And as you were talking, it dawned on me, it's not property taxes that you were talking about adjusting by 70 or 80. It was the projected sales tax.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Correct. I'm clear now, finally.
Mr. Nicholas?
If I could give everyone a kind of a property tax 101 real quick. The reason it doesn't affect this budget is property tax is based on the property that people own or the property tax for 2014 is based on the property that people own on January 1st, 2013, which is then due and payable on December 31st, 2013, and then we get a check about February. So it depends on what R.R. Donnelly owns on January 1st, 2014 will affect what we get in February of 16. Yeah, it'll be due and payable December 14. Oh, I'm sorry, 15. You're right. See, it gets confusing because it overlaps a year. Is the problem?
Additional questions? Okay, the last item is contingency, which I think is self-explanatory and no need for further discussion on that. We've made it through the mayor's proposed budget, so we'll come back at our next meeting, and we will, I'll first open that up, see if there's any discussions about the mayor's proposed budget, and then we're gonna go department by department, allow the department directors to give us an overview of their department and how the budget affects them, their staffing levels, et cetera, and make our way through the budget. So if there's no other objection, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Before we vote on that, I would like to make two announcements. Our next Budget Committee meeting is Monday, August 12th, from 5:30 to 7 p.m. here in the council chambers. And I would also like to once again remind the public that the public hearing on the budget is Monday, August the 19th at 6 p.m. here in the council chambers, and would encourage any citizen that has a comment that they would like to make with regard to the budget that they attend that meeting and sign up with the clerk to speak at that public hearing. With that, all in favor of adjourning, say aye. Opposed, nay. We are adjourned. Thank you.